So we started off our session with a bang. We gave our DM our updated character sheets, established that the swashbuckler took animate dead and magic vestments as his spells for 5th level Archivisdom. We also established that he had an extra spell slot, and was going to use it to boost the AC on my leather armor / shredded dress combo, since my AC is currently the lowest. Then immediately after our DM said game on, the next words were the swashbuckler saying, "Okay, time for me to animate some corpses." The dragon shaman was alright with us raiding a blessed tomb of ancients long forgotten and defiling their bones, but only if we were reverent about the whole thing. We walked quietly through the main chamber for a minute, running our hands across the coffins and saying out loud that we didn't mean any disrespect, but that we needed their bodies, and that the entire world was at stake. With that, we started wrenching open the doors and hauling their ancient carcasses out into the light of day. Well, we couldn't animate them in the consecrated ruins, so we were actually hauling them out to the dark of an Arctic night, but still. After harvesting the black onyx from the spellcasting bugs, we had way more than enough gems to animate them all, stuff our packs full of spare, and still have plenty for future animation. It occurred to us that even if the world pulled through, black onyx was going to become a very common commodity. Undeath might be very common in the future. Bleak, but not worse than the alternative, a single hive mind becoming a deity. Or multiple deities at once somehow. We debated dragging them across the platform and trying to animate them in the desecrated ziggurat, but a quick glance at doorway to it showed that the drifter's minions, Changeling, Thurin, and an ill-looking priest, had all made their way down, and were examining the portal room. We noticed Thurin say, "They must have the mirror," to which the Changeling made an exaggerated solemn nod and put her wrist to her forehead in the classic woe is us pose. Priest ran his hand along the edge of the doorway, obviously knowing where the portal was, and said, "We shouldn't talk in this room." They exited, looking like they were coming through the portal, but vanishing from view as they simply walked out into the rest of the ziggurat. The room was also practically opaque with drifter bugs, which the trio walked calmly through. The question of the drifter's intelligence has been raised, but he's obviously still smart enough to recognize his allies if nothing else. We camped out in the blessed temple for a night in order to reanimate more corpses than the others would be able to raise in a single day. The factotum got in on it too, so we now have 10 skeletons being controlled by the swashbuckler, leaving him 10 HD for anything interesting he finds, and 30 being controlled by the factotum, also leaving him 10 HD for anything interesting. While we were dragging the corpses out onto the snow platform, we noticed something though. The snow and ice that regularly settled, froze, broke off, and blew away, had formed a very obvious pattern. It had all settled in the shape of the jungle continent. Papa Hino obviously wanted us to come back around. Since we were just waiting around to raise more skeletons anyway, and knowing we might not get another chance, we took this opportunity to poke around the platform some more and see if we couldn't understand things better. We activated the magical mirror to check the dark chained hatch. The kobold put his hand to the metal, only to discover it's warm. It's not just warm, it's hot. I don't think this hatch leads to heaven, guys. We sat there processing that the hatch may very well lead to hell, when it hit us. If the hatch was a pit leading to hell, not confirmed, but, seems likely no, then how was the angel planning on getting to heaven? So we circle under the platform and look up. Sure enough. Looking through the mirror at the underside of the platform. Another perfectly circular portal, this one producing a soft blue glow around the edges of the gold and pearl seal of metal, just as thoroughly locked as the hatch above. This platform was literally where the world ends. Follow your compass to the one spot it spins wildly with no direction, and you find a stairway to heaven, and a pit straight to hell. It made us wonder if the ziggurats were even man-made, or were just some kind of fundamental aspect of this world itself. 2 regarding life, 2 regarding death, 2 that made things stronger, 2 that made things different. We still weren't opening either of these freaking hatches. So once we had all the skeletons raised, we armed them the best we could with what was laying around. I gave up a bunch of my daggers, the swashbuckler gave up his old rapier, the dragon shaman gave up his old morning star. The rest of them we armed with improvised clubs and staffs made from their own coffins. We took the whole mess of skeletons and opened the portal to the jungle ziggurats. We realized that if they know we have the mirror, heading to the Arctic platform is probably the next step on their agenda, and it's time we start staying a step ahead rather than a step behind. The bugs won't survive in the cold weather, but the drifter will undoubtedly find creatures to infect that will be able to. Knowing that, We couldn't be slowed down by escorting a small army of skeletons through the snow. We'd fly at rapid speed on the dragon, and leave the skeletons at the jungle ziggurat with orders to kill any bugs they see, bearing in mind, these are normal bugs, not drifter bugs. He seems to have abandoned the jungle ziggurat, but not to leave the building. We'll sail there as quick as possible to catch up with them and go from there. Makuiyer set up a small workshop in the Blessed Temple, knowing that we're, probably, the only ones who can get into the place, whether they reach the Arctic or not. So with the skeletons whacking away at any bugs they see, great and small, we set back off into the blistering cold of a lightless winter. The dragon zombie was stiff and icy from laying out exposed for so long, but an Endure Elements spell had it back up and running normally in no time. The dragon shaman grabbed the ropes, and we set off flying for our ship with utmost haste. The trip back was uneventful until we realized, by terrain and pathways, that we'd reached the area all of the fifth man's crew had been slaughtered. And none of the bodies were there. Kobold, that can't be too odd here. The near constant winds and billowing snow, they probably got buried by the elements relatively quickly. DM, sure thing. Spot checks. We all rolled, we all passed, and we all noticed a pack and loose gear from the body that we'd looted. But no body. Me, should we set down and investigate it? Everyone else in near unison, no. So we fly on as quick as zombie wings will carry us. Just when the drone of the Arctic winds against our face begins lulling us into a false sense that we'd passed the danger, we hear the dull hurtful howl that had become familiar to us after our prior experience. The hollow cry of a Wendigo, scratch that. The hollow cry of a chorus of Wendigos. Whether they were weaker, or because we weren't touching solid ground, they couldn't hammer us as hardly as the first one. It might have even been a combination of those two facts, as the first one may have been some kind of Wendigo lord or something. Either way, this batch couldn't make us roll will saves. So instead they just engaged us in midair. They were fast. Not as fast as the first one, but still fast, and they arced through the sky in a furious assault pattern, leaving trails of fire everywhere behind them, slashing at us with burning darkness. I changed my energy resistance to fire and started popping them with eldritch blasts. I beat their spell resistance about half the time, so at least I was chipping away at them. The swashbuckler had braced his heels against the dragon's spikes growing off its spine, and was in an attack stance, slashing back at anything that tried to get near us, and doing a decent job of it. The dragon shaman was holding on to the ropes dragging him for dear life, so he couldn't do anything but bank left and right to dodge them and hit them with an occasional fire breath. Everything was happening too fast for him to tell if it was working on them or not. The kobold at first thought he couldn't do anything either, since he was clinging to the dragon shaman's neck and holding on to him for dear life. Then it occurred to him that, if these things were undead, he could hit them with an opportunistic piety. He single-handedly blew up 3 of them in flashes of holy wrath by hitting them with turn undead uses. I popped 2, and the swashbuckler hacked 3, and the dragon shaman was finally vindicated when he roasted the last one and watched it fall silently out of the sky. The rest of our flight, and nights spent camping, were uneventful. Only so much happens in a frozen wasteland. When we made it back to the ship, we were relieved to discover that it was intact. It had taken some beating from the elements, but it was in good shape. The skeletons with barge poles had done a good job of keeping it away from the wall, and it appeared to be unbothered by any manner of creature. So we lashed the dragon back to the bow and had it pull us towards the jungle continent. We could see, in some areas, dark clouds on the horizon. Every time we saw them, we had to wonder if it was natural storm clouds, or the drifter coming our way. Occasionally, stray drifter bugs would find us, small swarms that would scurry around the deck in a deliberate suicide mission, searching for a way below deck to the angel, not knowing there was nothing but a feather and a bit of golden hair below decks. We could fight the swarms without too much difficulty, but it made us feel caged and cornered, even though we were on the open seas. The bugs were spread out, searching. They didn't all descend on us immediately, which was a plus. Maybe they couldn't pinpoint us instantly just by finding us. Just get a vague sense of direction and nothing more. It was halfway between the Arctic and the jungle continent when it happened. The entire ship rocked with a horrible sickening lurch, and we leaned to one side before settling back on an even course. Naturally we all ran to the edge and looked over into the waters. At first it looked like nothing was there. That's how big the creature was. The waters were darker where it swam under our ship. Out a ways we could see the lighter waters, and we realized how screwed we were. It was a kraken. A giant squid that utterly dwarfed our ship. And as our vessel bucked and groaned under the pressure again, we could see a golden glowing rune just below the surface. Swashbuckler, roll initiative, I'm diving in. Kobold, no. We need to get on the mounts and take to the skies. It's sad, but it's time to abandon ship. Dragon Shaman, I'm not willing to abandon ship. If you guys want to fly off, that's fine, but I'm staying to fight this thing, and I'm going down with the ship. I have the Dragon Bank hard left as a zombie can turn anyway. The Kraken veers off a ways slowly before jetting back and striking our underside, rocking us horribly again. Then it jets off ahead of us and turns around. Kobold, you can't give up your life over a boat. It's admirable for the captain to go down with his ship and all, but there's obviously more important things going on. We need you. Dragon Shaman, I shake my head sadly and lash a rope around my wrist before drawing my sword and getting ready to swing overboard for a hit at this thing when it comes back. Kobold, it will swallow you whole if it gets a chance, look at the size of it. It's 5 times the size of the ship, which is 20 times the size of US. The Kraken jets back at the bow, and I order the dragon to fly straight up. The ship rocks back as it hit a giant wave and groans horribly from the shift in weight. The Kraken clips the underside of the stern before the weight of the ship causes the dragon to crash back down to the water, and I order it to resume flying straight. The Kraken is behind us now, and circling around at another strike on our left. Why in the world doesn't it just wrap its tentacles around the boat and capsize us? Kobold, same reason the dragon didn't ram itself through the hull and tear us apart from the inside out. It doesn't want to risk killing the angel that isn't actually there. The Kraken jets forward at us, and I have the Dragon Bank hard right. The Kraken clips the back left of our ship and tears off a great portion of the wooden planks all along the side in the process. The Dragon Shaman swings down and plunges his sword into the beast's side, and the DM decided that due to circumstances, the squid moving multiple hundreds of feet per round with the sword being raked down its side, that the hit was triple damage. We could still tell it barely scratched the thing. Dragon Shaman, we're not going to be able to kill it, are we? Kobold, it tore open part of the hull. We're going to sink. Dragon Shaman, we already know the dragon pulls us above the water line. We can take on water and still sail fine as long as the dragon's pulling us. Swashbuckler, wait. How strong is the dragon? Can it lift the ship? DM, not a chance. Swashbuckler, what if the bat helped? The bat's pretty darn strong too, right? DM, even with both of them you're looking at 1/5 the carrying capacity necessary to lift, let alone fly. The Kraken jets at us again and tears off another section of the hull. Its tentacles grope around inside for a minute before it swims off for another strike. Kobold, what about just the deck? DM, huh. Kobold, we go around smashing at the support struts and the planks below the deck line. If we can get it weak enough, the Kraken will just tear the entire bottom of the ship clean off when it hits. Can the dragon and bat combined lift just the deck, us, and some cargo? DM, hold on, scribbles some notes before smiling yes. Actually the dragon himself should be able to do it. Kobold, looking at the Dragon Shaman, Captain. Dragon Shaman, yeah. Let's do it. I swing over the edge and start kicking planks loose below the deck line. Swashbuckler, me and the Kobold will go start chopping at the struts. I'll call the dragon back and start roping it to the deck as centered as I can. The Kraken strikes us again, tearing off another huge portion of the hull and groping around inside for a target that doesn't exist. I popped it with an eldritch blast and it jetted off to the side in anger, preparing another strike. By the time it circled and jetted at us twice more though, the Kobold's plan went perfectly. With a ragged cracking tearing sound, the entire hull of the ship came clean, well, pretty ragged actually, off from the rest, leaving nothing but the deck, the captain's quarters, and the dazed-looking crew cheering and flying off into the sky. The Kraken made a lunging strike at us with its tentacles, but it was nowhere close enough to knock us back to the waters. I still hit it with an eldritch spear out of spite. The upside is our ship is now, well, one of a kind for sure. The downside is that the feather was below deck, so now the drifter knows it was chasing nothing. Which probably means it's going to be heading for the jungle too. Can it sense the angel somehow? If it can, it's going to tear the feather apart and head in the same direction we are. We spent the rest of the flight towards the jungle carefully cutting loose the jagged planks and making the bottom of the deck as smooth as possible for landings. Along the way, I also turned to the 2 remaining skeleton crew, and said I suppose you are not needed anymore. Jump over the edge. If you survive the fall, destroy each other. The kobold responded with wow, cold, but agreed that we didn't need a manned crew anymore, and I might as well have the extra room in my controllable undead capacity. The DM let us transfer control between the undead creatures, so I gave up the sole remaining bat to the swashbuckler. It's officially his mount, his property, and under his mental control now. We're going to try to find a flying mount for the kobold too, hopefully by next level when the dragon shaman will be able to fly constantly under his own power. Then we'll all be airborne effectively as much as we want. We've also started modifying the deck of the ship to get ready to install metal grips for the dragon in the center of things. That way we won't have to rope him to it, I can just make him grab or let go as the situation calls for. That way we can land, take the dragon with us quickly, and still just fly back, grab a hold, and take off with relative speed. When I asked the dragon shaman about installing the grips on his deck, he just shook his head and said very solemnly, yeah, about that. I can't be captain anymore. I'm relinquishing command to you, it's your ship now. We were all quiet at that for a minute. I just said softly I'm sorry, but the dragon shaman said not to be. That sometimes the wrong course of action might still be the only way to lead to the right result. We rechristened the ship with one of the bottles of rum we'd taken from the decrepit ship in the Arctic. Since we had a blue dragon as our central power source, I wanted to name the ship the FS Bluebird. The party liked it, so we christened it as such and sailed/flew onto the jungle. We didn't even bother heading towards the port, going above the clouds and changing our destination for Papaheno's village straight away. It would only save us an hour, but an hour mattered now. Above the cloud cover, we stopped getting harassed by the occasional drifter bug. We wondered if we disappeared off his radar, or if he was gearing up for something bigger. Either way, when we reached Papaheno's village, we couldn't fly in through the barrier around it. But the angel came flying out to meet up with us, silently landing on the deck of the ship and heading into the captain's quarters without saying a word. After we watched her enter the only lockable room still on our ship, we turned around and were majorly surprised to find Papaheno standing on the deck of the ship, looking very sad. "Yeah, gots to take da bird girl with ya now. She ain't safe here no more. Ain't no one safe no more." We looked off on the horizon and could see, very faintly, a dark cloud heading our way. We knew what it must be. Papaheno just spit off the side of the ship, and a thunderstorm immediately broke over our immediate area. We asked him where we should go. What we should do. He just shook his head and looked straight up into the rain. We looked up as well, and in the instant we did, a lightning bolt curved through the clouds above us, flashing a shape into our eyes that followed anywhere we looked. We were dazed for a moment, but when we straightened up, we realized it was the eastern edge of the desert continent. The area where we found the first ziggurat. We had to go back. We looked around the deck for Papaheno, but he was gone just the way he'd come. Not having any reason to stay, nor being able to land in Heno's village, wanting to get the angel away from the approaching cloud on the horizon, and needing to pick up our skeletons, we simply left. We flew to the jungle ziggurat and circled, ordering the skeletons to emerge and climb it. They all scrabbled up the slopes as a group, which was difficult given the torrential downpour, but finally they made it to the pinnacle, and we began throwing them rope and pulling them on deck. We checked the weight, and even with the angel and skeletons, we were still a few 100 pounds under max flight capacity. So we started discussing strategy. We could go to the original ziggurat through the portals via the mirror, but they'd be expecting that. They had utter control over 2 ziggurats, including one we were trying to get into, and we'd probably be walking into a death trap if we just mirror walked ourselves in the easy way. That left the hard way. We escorted the angel through the jungle ziggurat, across the Arctic platform, and into the consecrated ziggurat with Makuir. He promised to try to keep her safe, and she cracked the first smile we had ever seen out of her when she began to pet one of the healing bugs. Then we mirror walked back to the jungle, climbed back into our ship, and began flying towards the desert continent. The plan was to hit it like a D-Day dropship. Have the skeletons hanging off ropes on the sides and jumping down as we circled the canyon, fighting to clear us a path. When we had won, we would all fly down individually, and send the Bluebird flying as high above the cloud cover as it could and circling until we re-emerged. Either we would come back out the way we came in, or try to mirror walk to the Arctic platform and reassess our situation with whatever information we gleaned while inside. It was getting late, so we ended session there. We leveled again, up to 12. The dragon shaman has a much stronger breath weapon now. The factotum gained the ability to bypass damage reduction and spell resistance. The Archivist got a step closer to getting Reincarnate and other 4th level spells. I got the ability to craft items with a UMD check, but I still haven't settled on a crafting feat. So, to get everything up to speed before I begin, I took the Scribe Scroll feat, for maximum versatility. I need to be able to make things quickly, while we're in travel mode, and for versatility I need to be able to limit the crafting to one of any given spell that we have a use for. Makuhir and the angel we're protecting are both in the consecrated ziggurat full of corpses. It's buried, how far we don't know, and where we don't know, so for all reasonable assumptions the only way to access the 2 of them is via the magical mirror that's in our possession. The 4 of us are reasonably well rested and in hale and healthy condition, ready to get our war on. We're going to have to get our war on, because our current plan of attack is to fly our undead dragon-powered airship to the jungle continent the drifter virus originated from, straight to the ziggurat, drop our 40 armed skeletons, and a skeleton dire bear, around the ziggurat like shock troopers, make sure we have a clear path, and haul into the ziggurat to see why we're going there. It hit us at the start of the session that our lead is literally a bolt of lightning. We might be running a fool's errand. Never let it be said that adventurers aren't fools. With that, we set off for the few days' travel to the desert ziggurat. Since the overland travel was going to take a few days, I set out scribing scrolls, and the factotum installed thick heavy wooden handles on the deck of the ship for the dragon to grab onto, so he's now detachable. I can take 10 to automatically pass the check to scribe an arcane scroll, and I can also automatically make an arcane scroll of 6th level or lower, but to make a higher level divine scroll, I have to actually pass a real UMD check. So first I made a scroll of Reincarnate for the swashbuckler to put in his prayer book next level. Then I set out trying to make a scroll of Regenerate for my ruined legs. The first check I rolled a 2. The second one I rolled a 12, 1 over what I needed, and successfully scribed the scroll. After casting the spell and regrowing my legs, my character came out onto the deck of the ship and did a little victory jig. The timing was perfect, as not more than a half hour after reacquiring my legs, and remembering how to walk on them, the desert continent appeared on the horizon. The drifter bugs were not very thick. In fact, there weren't that many at all. We came to the conclusion that the drifter was focusing less energy on filling the planet with a giant swarm, and more on infecting everything possible. The huge masses of bugs were not the front wave of an ocean of insects, they were more like strike teams sent out to search and infest. This was good and bad for us. Good because it meant we could focus less on fighting through a cloud of insects. Bad because it meant we'd be fighting whoever was left behind instead. As we flew over the desert city, we saw it was full of the infected. Their faces turned up and watched our ship fly overhead, golden runes flashing on their foreheads in the sunlight. A few on roofs took pot shots at our underside with crossbows, but there wasn't a lot they could do other than observe our path. We were certainly far too fast for them to try to keep up. Except we were intercepted halfway between the city and the ziggurat in midair. An entire swarm of sphinxes, great lions with wings and almost human faces, flew over the deck of our ship, golden runes flashing on their foreheads as sure as any other creature. The fight was an interesting one, as immediately me and the dragon shaman rolled overboard and began to attack the sphinxes in midair. The swashbuckler hopped on his dire bat and also joined the fray, leaving our poor kobold stranded on deck and firing crossbow bolts at our enemies. He was still pretty handy, as we would occasionally fly in patterns that gave him ranged sneak attack opportunities, and some of the sphinxes landed on the deck and began assaulting him directly as a result. At one point, the dragon shaman landed on the deck and managed to grapple/mount one of the sphinxes, and charged up for a lay on hands to see if he could cure it of the bug infection. The DM said he could feel multiple bugs wriggling around inside, and could pinpoint one and tell how much juice it would take to kill it. It turned out to be 30 points of healing, which was a lot. Our dragon shaman can only heal 120 points a day, even. Still, he let fly and pulsed the bug he'd pinpointed, at which point the glowing rune faded from the sphinx's forehead. And it coughed up a dead onyx bug onto the deck of our ship. And said, where am I?" clearly very confused. And then it cried out in pain. And another golden glowing rune flashed onto its forehead. The dragon shaman also, unfortunately, could not tell how many bugs were writhing inside of the infected sphinx. It might be 3 at a time, it might be a dozen. It was at once disheartening and enlightening. We knew we could kill the bugs with positive energy, or healing energy specifically, but 30 points of healing per bug was a whole heap of healing, especially when facing a swarm that could literally escort people through it by holding them aloft over sea. We now had a useful bit of information, but with no real practical application. Unless we could find a way to drop massive heal bombs somehow. What did make it an interesting development was the swashbuckler's familiar, Chitter. All of the sudden, Chitter went from being something to keep alive, to a vital combatant. Or at least, a handy little helper. It managed to make 2 touch attacks to hit one of the Sphinxes with 2 heal spells, temporarily driving the bug out of it, and giving the swashbuckler a better chance at attacking. It was mean, because he was attacking something that didn't even know why it was engaged in combat, but, well, we just couldn't think about that. 6 seconds of its pain and confusion in exchange for our lives. The dragon shaman disapproved, but the swashbuckler promised to only break out that trick when we were in dire straits. The fight raged on, and while we took a few licks, eventually we tore the Sphinxes up and sent most of them sprawling broken and hurtling towards the surface. We'd managed to kill a few on deck, and while one had done the whole dissolve into a swarm of bugs thing, which we then also had to fight, we remembered to coup de grace the others to kill them before they could do it too. Before we tossed them overboard, being uncomfortably close to our weight limit for staying aloft, we of course checked how many HD they had. The 2 best ones were 12 HD and 9 HD. The kobold took the 12 HD one, after destroying 2 of his skeletons, reaching his undead cap, and the swashbuckler took the 9 HD one, after destroying 3 of his skeletons to retain control over the bat and the Sphinx, and reaching his undead cap. So we're all airborne now, thankfully. The Sphinxes are not as fast as the dragon, but faster than the bats, and me and the dragon shaman for that matter. They're also strong, so they can lend a hand, in carrying the ship if need be. In fact, one of them is strong enough to lift the ship, but not with as much weight as the dragon, so between the 2 Sphinxes, the dragon, and the bat, we could actually do some major hauling if we had to. Me and the dragon shaman are the slowest flyers, but we can fly under our own power, and if necessary for speed the 2 of us could always climb onto the dragon and fly it directly. Once we were straight and ready again, we had the dragon stop flying in circles and resume heading towards the ziggurat. It only took us another minute or 2 to reach it, and when we did, we saw it was going to be a relatively easy approach. The canyon had a large number of rune-scarred faces glaring up at us angrily, but we had a large number of armed skeletons. Before we dropped our undead shock troopers, we threw the dice into the canyon. It came up wolf and swarm, and suddenly a pack of 7 wolves sprang up and began attacking everyone nearby. Collectively, they managed to kill the wolves, but that was just when we swooped down through the canyon at the lowest angle the bluebird could successfully make and still get out safely, and we sent the skeletons, including the skeleton bear, jumping over the edges and landing as high on the ziggurat as they could. They were low enough that most of them took no fall damage, and the ones that missed the pinnacle didn't take enough to destroy them. They ran down the ziggurat weapons ready, and the infected people, softened up from the wolves, ran up to fight them. I gave the dragon orders to fly above the cloud cover, and then to circle in the area. Me and my fellow adventurers flew down, sans mounts, only taking the bat for both the swashbuckler and the kobold together. On the way down, the kobold cast stone skin on himself, and we got ready for a fight. A few of the infected broke through the skeletons, and were attacking us with thrown rocks and had weapons at the ready, but we fought through them with little effort and made our way into the ziggurat. We felt very rushed, figuring the entire city's worth of people, and God knows what else, might be swarming on our location as we search. We made our way to the main chamber with only a few peeks into side rooms to see if any new developments had arisen. Aside from masses of black onyx bugs with the golden glowing runes, we couldn't find anything noteworthy. Even once we reached the main chamber, things looked to be in about the same condition as they were the last time we'd been here. The symbol had faded from the ground, there were bugs crawling lazily around, not even bothering to try to attack us, since it knew we were strong enough to just bash them outright. We took the time to scoop up the angel's eyes, and it hit me that I could try to regenerate her sight, but it still seemed disrespectful to leave the eyes laying around. We opted to take a closer, slower look, time pressures or not. In the smaller chambers off the main chamber, one of which being the portal room, we found little scraps and remnants that showed the drifters' minions had been staying here. We even found a scroll of cure light wounds that had gotten left behind, but not much else. What we finally did stumble across, in the same pile of crap we dug the scroll out of, was a map. It was a very sparse and general map, and it was so ancient it practically crumbled in our hands. It was missing land masses, it was labeled in some ancient language none of us knew, and it listed a few things that no longer exist, but it was definitely a map. A map with the location of the 4 ziggurats clearly labeled. It slowly, very slowly, dawned on the entire group that they knew where the 4th ziggurat was, and had all along. Its value was a secret base was nil, because they knew where it was the entire time. It was only their lack of interest, maybe, in unearthing it and the difficulty of digging it up that kept them from already being inside of it. We didn't know if they could tell the angel was in it or not, but we officially no longer considered it a safe location. The kobold noticed something else too, with a triple success on knowledge, history, geography, and religion rolls. The consecrated ziggurat had a symbol next to it meaning holy, and the desecrated ziggurat had one next to it meaning unholy. More important though, was the location of the consecrated ziggurat. It was directly underneath the church. The church the angel had been summoned and bound in, it was buried below it. Kobold, anyone else putting 4 and 4 together here? Me, all I've got is, we need to find out if they know where the angel is. Kobold, no. We have a portal up to heaven, and a portal down to hell. We have an angel who was bound to the world at a consecrated ziggurat, and we have a desecrated ziggurat half the world away. Long pause. Dragon Shaman, they're going to summon a devil. Kobold, I wonder if the devil would put up a fight, or go along with things. Swashbuckler, why didn't they just summon the devil first? Me, maybe it's harder? Or maybe hell just wasn't the drifters' first choice, who knows? Kobold, we need to get back to the jungle ziggurat now. Me, we also need to get the angel out of the underground bunker as quick as possible. Dragon Shaman, but we can't bring her out of the bunker just to put her in harm's way at the volcano. So we had to stop and formulate a plan. We were going to go through the mirror portal, snag the angel, come back through the desert portal, put her on the ship and tell the dragon to obey her commands and send her far away, and then go back through the portals to the volcano to try to stop them from summoning a devil. Follow? So that's exactly what we set out to do. We opened a portal to the Arctic platform, to which the DM made us roll spot checks. You've never seen an entire table just lock up like that before. We all just stared uncomfortably, before awkwardly shuffling around and rolling our dice. DM, okay, you don't see anything. Long quiet pause. DM, well. Kobold, God. I guess we march calmly out onto the platform, without a care in our heads, stupid rules against metagaming. Dragon Shaman, I hate life. The worst part is we successfully went across the platform, into the consecrated ziggurat, explained things to Makuiyer and the angel, and took her with us back across the Arctic platform and to the desert with us. So the DM was just screwing with us, or something was watching us. Either way, I second the Dragon Shaman on the whole hating life thing. Still, we did what we set out for. Getting the angel up to the desert surface was hard, as the bugs began to swarm her. We fought them off and got out into the sunlight, only to discover that our skeletons had won the fight. And there were still 6 of them left, and the bear. The swashbuckler cast some inflicts on them to get them healed up. We grabbed the dice, and we got all the skeletons and the angel on the deck of the ship, ordered the dragon to obey her, and the skeletons and bat and sphinxes to defend her, and told her to avoid trouble at all cost. We didn't have the faintest clue as to where to send her off to, but we gave her the seal Makuiyer had given us, my suggestion, thanks to you guys reminding me it exists, and told her to keep him updated as to where she was, so he could keep us updated. Then the 4 of us flew back down to the canyon. On the way down, we saw masses heading towards the canyon, just as predicted, but we were too far ahead of them for it to be a concern. As long as they didn't notice the angel flying above the cloud cover and off into the distance. We made our way back to the portal room, back across the Arctic platform, and went to the volcano ziggurat on Central Island. We realized, going into the volcanic ziggurat, that we could be walking into any kind of horrible trap, ambush, ritual, or, God knows what. We looked through the portal first, but didn't actually see anything relevant, and so, like adventurers, opted to just charge blindly into things. We discovered that the portal room was barricaded, from the inside. And tucked into a blind corner was a small pile of personal belongings, and a human-sized clay egg. We poked around for a minute before the Dragon Shaman realized what was happening. He rummaged through the personal belongings, found a journal, established that it belonged to the changeling, and flipped it open to the last few entries. The entries were about Priest and Thurin growing less and less trusting of her, and how things were becoming bleaker and bleaker. Apparently, they were planning on summoning a devil, which had been bound to the world as one of its pillars just as the angel had. Apparently as well, that was the last straw for the changeling, who was bailing out. Her last entry was about how she hoped the others would ignore her long enough for the transformation to take place. She was becoming a dragonborn. Which means she's vowed to serve Bahamut and was trying to redeem her soul. And she was hatching. She broke out of her egg, now a draconic humanoid like our shaman, though skinny and lankier, and looked around in panicked surprise, stumbling awkwardly out of the broken shell and struggling, clearly shaky and struggling to balance herself, away from us and into the far corner, looking about as pitiable as something can look. Dragon Shaman, it's okay. We're not going to hurt you. Me, I still think we should kill her. Dragon Shaman, I growl at the warlock. Me, I don't mean to be spiteful, but can we trust her? She's a liability at best. I don't want to spend my time sleeping with one eye open. Dragon Shaman, can she talk? The changeling shakes her head sadly and cups her face in her hands. Dragon Shaman, sometimes redemption takes the hard road. To which the changeling covers her face in a weeping gesture and nodding, before looking around confused for a moment, and then looks up as if she's remembering something, scrambling awkwardly, and naked, mind you, to her feet, grabbing a few articles of clothing and throwing them on herself as she leads us stumbling up through the ziggurat, gesturing for us to follow her. The swashbuckler asks why she's stumbling so much, but the dragon shaman reminds him that dragonborn are clumsy in their new bodies, especially right out of the shell. We make our way to the entrance, out where it leads to a pool of open lava in the volcano's heart. And up on the ledge? We see Priest and Thurin standing on opposite sides of the volcano. It's not immediately obvious what they're doing, until Thurin shouts to Priest, "Are you sure this is a good idea?" And a grinning Priest replies, "Not at all, that's why it was Plan B." And with that, he looked down and smiled even wider and look. The sacrifice is here. As the gears started whirring, and it hit us how deliberate the word sacrifice is, the dragon shaman turned to the changeling, who was slinking back down the hall away from us silently. She shook her head, her face now melting back into an expressionless gray mask, before she mouthed the words "I'm sorry" and stomped the ground as hard she could. When she stomped, the ground and the entire doorway shook horribly, and we had to make reflex saves to stay up. The factotum and swashbuckler passed, me and the dragon shaman failed. The lava pool out the doorway began to swirl and churn immediately, forming some kind of super hot vortex with black swirls. The two upright members of our party moved to attack her and get the kobold a flanking position, but as they did the stonework cracked away from the floor in vague shape of a humanoid, and the shambling mess of rock bullrushed the dragon shaman clean over the edge, tumbling into the lava. The dragon shaman just glided over the lava pool and started a slow spiral upwards, shouting up at Priest, "You think a little heat is going to slow me down?" Priest responded, "Well, it's not so much about the heat as it is about the darkness. We're not after your flesh, we're after your soul." Dragon shaman, "I think I'll bank a little higher, away from the swirling vortex." Thurin joined in, shouting at the dragon shaman that they needed the soul of a kind heart, and if he didn't just give up and dive into the pool, they were just going to pick some infected kid, shove them in, and have the drifter abandon them halfway down. The dragon shaman cringed, rolled a sense motive check, failed and cringed again, before saying, "Whether you're bluffing or not, I won't kill myself to satisfy you. I'm one of the only ones who can stop you." Thurin just laughed. The rest of us were up and making a move to attack the changeling, but she managed to make it past us to the doorway before flying straight upwards just far enough to land on the lip of the volcano where Thurin and Priest were. When Priest saw me down on the ledge, he waved the orb haphazardly at me. He shouted down that his workers hadn't been very valuable to his plans lately, and that getting rid of me would be worth the price of getting rid of them too. Then he tossed the orb casually out over the open air, spinning down into the open lava. I didn't know what would happen to me if it hit, but I did the only thing I could do. I fired a repelling blast straight at the orb, and successfully knocked it back far and hard enough to lodge it into the rock face across from the doorway. Priest went wide-eyed and started running over to the area it was, but he had no way down to get it, as far as I hoped. I flew out over the lava, suffering heat damage and fatigue as the swirling vortex churned hot air up at us, but I took it in stride and booked for my soul lodged in the rock face. I got to it before it could work loose, and circled it with the leather straps Papahino gave me. I could tell immediately what the orb and straps did. As long as I had on the bracers, it would bind my own soul back to me. I wouldn't age, I wouldn't die naturally. All I had to do was keep me, and the orb safe, and I would cheat a demon lord out of my soul. I'm sure that wouldn't become a concern in the coming centuries or anything, right? Demons never hold grudges. I could also feel that I had some control over the orb, but in the fray, and the panic induced by hovering over a pool of soul-stealing lava, I didn't get a good empathic feel for what the orb was capable of. I looked up and saw Priest glaring down at me, and smirked up at him, waving my newly acquired soul in his direction. I started floating up away from the lava, to get out of the damaging area, and once I was clear I hit Priest with a repelling blast, which knocked him 20 feet straight up before he tumbled back down into the same square. I got up to the edge just as he was climbing up and starting to run down the slope. The DM informed me of something I realized I could do with the orb. As long as it was covered in the straps and I was wearing the bracers, I could call the orb back to me as a full round action. This was relevant, because I realized I could also throw the orb and fire eldritch blasts from it as if it were me. I smirked again, and pitched the orb as hard as I could in front of Priest. He watched it sail past his head, and as soon as it was past him, I used it to fire a repelling blast backwards, knocking him towards me. I caught his wrists just before he spilled out into the flaming death chasm, holding him there above the lava and staring down into his face. He was no longer smiling, even though the corners of his face were still curled up slightly in a sick grin. I asked him why he always had that hideous smile on his face. He laughed and said, "Oh, because I'm having such a great time. Tell me, did you catch me to interrogate me, or to try to redeem me?" My response: "I just wanted a chance to spit in your face before I killed you." Which is exactly what I did. As Priest fell into the lava, he screamed satisfying. The pool literally bubbled up to catch him, swallowing him whole and pulling him below the surface. The pool flashed black, but then continued to churn. The ritual needed a kind heart. Priest hadn't been an appropriate sacrifice, and the volcano was still hungry. As this had been going on, the dragon shaman had flown up to engage the changeling, and Thurin had literally leapt down the volcano and landed on the stone platform, to fight the swashbuckler and factotum directly. I'll get back to Thurin later, because that's where everything winds up flowing back together. First we have to talk about the dragon shaman flying up directly at the changeling, who was staring back at him with an icy resolve. The dragon shaman floated up and landed in front of the changeling with a roar, taking a hard swing at her with his sword, but missing. The changeling in return stomped the ground again, making another mini-earthquake. But the force of it made the lip of the volcano crumble around them, causing both of them to stumble. The dragon shaman managed to get a grip on the edge of the crumbling stonework, and grabbed the changeling's hand before she could fall. She just looked down at the swirling mess of lava and looked back up at the dragon shaman sadly, expecting to be dropped. She was limp, not making a grip against the dragon shaman and letting her hand slip out of his without struggling. The dragon shaman screamed for her to hold on, but she just laid there slack. He asked if he could make a strength check to swing her up onto solid footing. He rolled a natural 20. When he threw her up back onto stable ground, instead of dropping her, she stared at him slack-jawed, obviously confused and surprised. Her face melted into some random female form she hadn't made before. The dragon shaman, clinging there and expecting to be pushed off any second, didn't even struggle. He just looked up at her and asked, "Is that you? Is that what you really look like?" The changeling kept staring, tearing up, still slack-jawed, before grabbing the shaman and helping to pull him up. She barely succeeded, full plate alone being heavy as heck, but in the end, they both tumbled away from the edge and she collapsed next to him, covering her face, not making a noise even though her chest was heaving, obviously crying as hard as anyone can. The drifter was not happy. The bugs in the area saw this happen, and immediately kicked into a vicious frenzy, a thick black mass descending on the dragon shaman and changeling. He sprung up and hit them with a really strong fire breath, carving a charred swath through them, but they were so thick that even the damage he caused didn't stop them. They formed a massive fist twice the size of a person and literally punched the dragon shaman clean 50 feet away. He could see through the swarm that they were attacking the changeling, and that she wasn't fighting back. Before more than a few seconds passed, she glared back at him from inside a dissipating swarm. A golden rune glowing on her forehead. She growled loudly at the dragon shaman. A high wailing noise of unbridled fury. It was a sick joke. She was no longer silent, because it was no longer her. And with that she ran at the volcano and jumped off. Except I had been floating there above the heat, and when I saw what had happened, I decided to do the dragon shaman a favor. I managed to get under the changeling and caught her, using the counter of her falling to swing her and throw her through the doorway into the ziggurat. A temporary solution, but it gave our shaman time to work something out for our little redeemed shapeshifter. I paid for the move though, and the giant mass of drifter bugs that had knocked the dragon shaman back literally swatted me out of the sky, sending me sprawling down for the lava, which bubbled up hungrily at me. I managed to float for all I was worth back up, barely catching myself in midair, roasting myself lightly in the process, fire resistance or not. I was floating back up out of range of the lava when the bugs smacked me down again, definitely close enough to knock me clean into it. But the dragon shaman had been running to the volcano, took a diving glide in my direction, and tackled me in through the doorway into the ziggurat, meeting up with the rest of our party, Thurin, and the infected changeling.